Hello everyone, this is our second discussion for our second Anubhav test today. Let me give you a few brief overall analytical observations about this paper before we start looking at the paper. In the first Anubhav paper that you would have solved, you would have noticed that the questions were slightly harder for passages. We are discussing only passages right now. But for this second test, we have kept the questions, the passage questions, slightly easier. Somewhat like, we can say, somewhat like 2019 maybe, or 2022-23 papers. 2023 paper, English was, passages were the easiest I've ever seen. So 23 paper was only difficult for maths. Passages were easy. So we have kept the level of difficulty slightly on the easier side for the passages. Some of you would have noticed that. The reason why I'm saying that is if in this exam your accuracy for passages is too low or it's on the lower side, it's not a good thing. We expect the accuracy to be at least average or above average based on the level of difficulty of the questions. We'll go through each question. Those of you who have done classes with me will know that for each question I use a specific method. And all the methods that we use, they are all evidence based, meaning that nowhere in the question or the solving process do I take decisions based on what one feels or whether option sounds right or wrong. We take all our decisions based on specific words in the passage or in the option only. That approach is going to help us stay consistent and is going to help us be more accurate than what we usually are if we solve questions just based on a general understanding. Okay. Let's start with the first question here. I've marked the passages in a certain way where we can understand the main point of the author with that much more clarity. Here the author's main point is that India's water resources are under increasing stress due to, and multiple reasons are given. If you notice, I have not marked the reasons given because if an option requires me to, I will go back to the passage and see what are the reasons given for India's water resources. The main point of the author, however, is since there is this challenge, India's water resources are increasing stress, what we require is coordination between states and institutions, because this is what will allow us to manage water resources in a shared way sustainably. So the author recommends a solution of sorts to us. Now I just want all of you to pay careful attention to this practical question type that is asked in the exam. This applies to practical question types alone. What we want to do here is we want to take an action which the state would take, right? The state is likely to take. This is what we can analyze based on the practical implication questions that have been asked by UPSC since the past 4 years. 2020 was the first time they asked the practical implication question. After that, they asked it more frequently, and we have to solve it as if we are acting as the state. And we have this data. Our data is there is increasing stress for water resources, and what we need are coordination institutions which will give us some kind of coordination between states so that they can manage the water in a more sustainable way. Now A says transfer of water governance entirely to union. This would be invalid. This does not allow states and institutions to share it correctly. D says increasing dependence on groundwater. This would be a completely invalid practical solution. What could be, if you notice, I'm stressing on the word practical here and not implication, because this is not like a standard implication or inference question. This is asking us to take what would be a practical action for the state, for the Indian state in this case, for the state of India. So C, expansion of river interlinking projects. So river interlinking is not going to allow coordination. For coordination, you are going to need promotion of decentralized basin level water management institutions. You need something that is going to help states or different units compare the amount of water they have carefully. So basin level management will help them compare and make their demands known, so they can coordinate for their demands. and share accordingly. B is the right answer. Okay. I think we can expect in the actual exam at least 2 practical implication questions this time. Let's take a look at the corollary question type. Corollary means I'm drawing a conclusion. Corollary means a conclusion. And as far as the exam is concerned, the definition of corollary as far as the exam is concerned is a conclusion made on basis of main point of the author. Main point के main point के information पे, using that information, some corollary has been made. It's a conclusion made using the main point of the author. Okay. That is what we'll use as the definition according to the exam. We are told India's demographic advantage depends on working age population and its health, but persistent undernutrition is weakening the economy. Right? So, undernutrition is weakening the economy despite having demographic advantage. So, if you notice, for every option I have words marked which make that option correct or incorrect. Even in a correct option like option B, there would be problematic words, but I have to check them whether they are acceptable. In the case of option B, they are acceptable, but in A, macroeconomic growth can independently generate, this would be invalid, sustained economic momentum. So, these words make A invalid. Similarly, D, improvements in disease management are unlikely to alter cognitive outcomes. If they are unlikely to alter cognitive outcomes, that is not a valid corollary. I am drawing a conclusion based on main point. Okay. C says a strategic reorientation away from manufacturing led growth. So, reorient yourselves away from manufacturing, not stated, invalid. B says investment in early life health and nutrition is critical. So, investment in health is critical, right? This would make investment in health critical. For improving human capital quality and favorable long-term economics. So, this would help our economic future, and this would help our current nutritional future. Option B is the correct corollary or the correct conclusion based on main point. Okay. Let's try the next question from this set, passage 3. Passage 3 is talking about which of the following best captures the crux of the passage. Crux is a different way to phrase main point. It's a commonly used way to phrase it. There are many ways to phrase main point, central argument, primary argument, there could be multiple ways. The crux of the author is in many developing economies, agricultural systems have resource constraints. They have small and marginal farmers. Because of this, it's often insufficient to counter the scale of climatic shocks. Because there are resource constraints, they cannot counter climatic shocks. So, effective adaptation can succeed only when farmers recognize climate risks. So, for adaptation, there are 2 problems. One is resources are insufficient, and the other is recognizing risks. So, the main point of the passage should be something about how agricultural systems in developed economies are resource constrained and they have climate identification of risk as a possible challenge. Unless we allow farmers to identify the risk, they can't actually put this resource to use. It can only succeed if farmers can first identify the risk. So, we need to identify risks first and then we can overcome resource constraints. A says autonomous adaptation is sufficient. What is sufficient from the passage? Invalid. Autonomous adaptation would be insufficient because they don't have money and they can't identify risks. So, it would be insufficient. B says government-led adaptation must replace all farm level initiatives. Must replace all would be invalid. D says climate change adaptation is primarily a technological challenge. Excuse me. This is not a technological challenge according to the passage. Without awareness, climate adaptation cannot succeed. C is the correct choice. C could have better alternatives. We could have better ways to write down the crux of the passage. We can maybe include Resource constraints also, right? We can mention resource constraints also maybe. So maybe some other things are needed, but option C is the best possible choice we have. Okay. Now let's take a look at passage 11. For passage 11, we are discussing summarizes or summary. Summary means we'll take this full passage, whatever it is from start to end, and we are trying to find some option, let's say option E, which will help us in a way replace this passage in a few words. The reason why I say replace this passage is I want to choose that option as correct. Let's say option E is right, in such a way that option E can provide a good enough snapshot, a summary of whatever the passage is, even in the absence of the passage. Meaning if some point is not mentioned in option E, which is crucial for the passage to exist, then option E cannot be correct. But we choose it such that it covers all the required points. Now, you'll notice that obviously options are trickier than the concept of summary. We are told here the main point is climate change policy involves making choices under deep uncertainty. So for climate change policy, you take uncertain decisions. Failure to reduce emissions today may cause problems. Responsible decision making therefore requires avoiding paths that could lead to irreversible harm. So there is some tricky decision making when it comes to climate, and we need to reduce emissions today. Ideally, we'll have an option which will replace all of this information with the valid choice. We don't get such ideal options. A says climate change effects can be reversed easily, would be invalid. Future generations will have better tools, invalid. Does not summarize an incorrect facts. These are incorrect facts stated. D says climate policy should focus only on adaptation, which would also be incorrect. C is the right answer. Delayed action increases the risk of extreme and costly outcomes. Delayed action is based on this and increases the risk of extreme costly outcomes, because if we can't do this, there would be terrible cost to pay. Option C can include some other things about decision making, but nothing about decision making in option C. So option C is lacking in some way, but it's the best possible choice. It does not have these mistakes. Okay. Let's look at passage 2, question 12. So we are looking at which of the following is the most rational assumption. I've discussed assumption questions in the past. Those of you who don't know, an assumption is so let me define an assumption for you. An assumption is a necessary underlying logical connection. तो इसमें a necessary underlying logical connection, focus on the words underlying. Underlying meaning this option, let's say option E is the correct choice for assumptions. If it's the correct choice, that means option E is necessary for the passage to exist. It's a necessary underlying logical connection for the passage to exist. If I remove option E, if I say option E is incorrect, then that logical connection which is necessary for the passage will fall apart. We'll see how this works. Let's look at the passage. In the passage, we are told organizations have talented people, yet they stagnate. This is because priorities are unclear. Efficiency cannot substitute for direction. What you need is good leadership, which can align purpose and produce. Otherwise, institutions will just produce activity without achievement. It will just be wasted activity. So which of these is a valid underlying assumption? A says organizational competence naturally yields success irrespective of clarity. These words are obviously invalid. B, competitive internal dynamics inherently enhance long-term organizational effectiveness. Nothing inherently enhances in the passage according to the passage. So B is incorrect. C says operational acceleration can compensate for absence of coherence. We are told produce activity without achievement. So can compensate would be invalid. D is the right answer. Collective effort requires a shared interpretative framework. to translate action into outcomes. Now, option D is a valid assumption. What I want you to consider is, when we say valid assumption, that means option D is necessary for this passage to exist and make sense. If I said collective effort does not require collective effort does not require a shared interpretative framework to translate action into outcomes, this idea that aligned purpose is needed would fall apart, which means D is a necessary underlying assumption. It's underlying because it's located within this information already. It's located inside this information already. That's why underlying assumption. The reason why I'm repeating this is people get confused between assumption and inference. The exam is never going to ask you to make that distinction between assumption and inference, but I'm just defining assumptions nevertheless. I'll define inferences also when we see them. D is the right answer. There we have it, an inference question. And inference is me making or us making a fresh conclusion from the passage. So that means we take the information from the passage and we see if we can reach a new conclusion. What we are doing for the assumption is we are checking whether something exists in the passage. Is it within the passage? Is it underlying the passage? But for inferences, we take a fact from the passage and we try to reach a new conclusion, a fresh conclusion. Okay, so let's take a look at the passage. Unemployment rate does not capture something correctly. That group of people who stop seeking work because of repeated failure. So that group which gives up seeking work is not counted in unemployment rate. They are not counted as unemployed because they may be still without employment. A stable or falling unemployment rate can coexist with weak job prospects if labor force participation declines. So we are told that an unemployment rate which is falling is not a clear indicator because it can coexist with weak job prospects if labor force participation declines. So if this is taking place, there can be an unemployment rate which hides the actual state of labor, right? Actual state of employment. So let's make a fresh conclusion based on this. Let's draw an inference. The looking at specific words and checking if they follow or not is the same process. So D says expanding job creation alone eliminates distortions. So ये जो words alone eliminates distortions, this will be incorrect. I can't say that something specifically eliminates distortions. Labor force withdrawal primarily reflects voluntary lifestyle choices. Primarily reflects voluntary lifestyle choices. This entire phrase is invalid. Declining unemployment rates reliably indicate improving demand. The rates are actually unreliable. They do not capture things. So the rates are unreliable. So I can't say reliably indicate. B is incorrect. Headline labor statistics. So let's say we don't know what headline means. Labor statistics may understate employment stress during periods of prolonged job scarcity. So a stable or falling unemployment rate, which is labor statistics, right? Stable or falling employment rate is labor statistics, may understate employment stress, can coexist with weak job prospects. So employment stress would be, I'll circle it here, weak job prospects during periods of prolonged job scarcity. Period of prolonged job security ko we'll mark it in a different color, let's say yellow. So this would be with if labor force participation declines. So all of option A is a fresh conclusion based on the second sentence. The reason why I call it fresh conclusion is headline labor statistics may understate employment stress. These are not underlying the passage. These are fresh conclusions we drew from the passage. Anyway, that is the theoretical distinction between assumption and inference. The question that exam is going to ask is going to be very clear and we are supposed to apply that process. A is the right answer here. Okay, we have pretty much covered every question type now. Now let's just solve the questions as valid or invalid assumptions. So here we are looking at assumptions. Assumptions can be from anywhere in the passage. Passage is about citizens increasingly depend on digital platforms which have online fraud in them. And because of this, people avoid digital services. So you need to strengthen cyber security. This is a requirement because you need and you need to enable innovation for that. So what would be a valid underlying assumption? Trust is essential for expansion of digital services. So trust, the word trust is actually used, I think, somewhere in the passage. Reduce trust in these systems. So trust is essential. This is valid. If I said trust is not essential, this part of the passage would fall apart. So it's a valid underlying assumption. One is valid. Two, cyber security improvement can promote innovation and adoption. So yes, this improvement here can improve innovation and adoption. So strengthening cyber security can improve innovation and can improve adoption. Both are valid. C is the correct answer for question number 21. Okay. Let's take a look at this passage. So यहाँ पे again we are asked to, this is question 22, we are again asked to look at some assumptions and check if they are valid or not. Vaccines require long-term research. Private firms invest in that time because they get exclusive marketing rights. Then we are told, but during public health emergencies, governments may need that. They can't keep it exclusive, then they would need that right over that vaccine for emergencies. Thus, policy must balance rewarding innovation with ensuring rapid equitable access. So if you're making a vaccine policy, it should do two things. It should allow people to exclusively market it for some time or whenever they need to, and the policy should also allow rapid equitable access when it's needed, when there is a emergency. So let's look at one. Exclusivity in vaccine production can encourage private firms in R&D. So this is true, valid. High vaccine prices can reduce equitable access during emergencies. So affordable access, so cost is a factor. High vaccine prices can reduce equitable access is valid. If I said cannot, this logic that affordable and equitable are conflicting, this logic that is connecting these two will fall apart if I said cannot reduce. So 1 and 2 are valid. That already eliminates option C. Let's look at 3. Temporary licensing or partnerships can improve supply without eliminating incentives. So can improve supply. Can we check if temporary partnerships can do this? Temporary licensing arrangements, right? These can help expand supply. So temporary licensing can improve supply without eliminating incentives. 4 is invalid. 4 states innovation and affordability are conflicting and near impossible to balance. So 4 would be invalid. The right answer would be option B. The right option would be option B. Okay. So if you notice so far, paper is easy. आसान है paper, इतना मुश्किल नहीं है. We can expect most students to have like at least average level of accuracy. Each option, when I say आसान है paper, not just based on questions, each option has some word which we can quickly check and is problematic. The words are not too difficult. It's relatively easier for us to notice them. Okay. Regarding improving insurance adoption, which of the following solutions are implied? We are looking at implied solutions. So this is that practical question type which we just did, but it's asked in a different way. Which of these are solutions which can be taken practically? Okay. Now the passage is talking about solutions implied, मतलब passage में कोई problem होगा. Insurance penetration remains low. This is the problem. People still prefer informal risk sharing methods because they distrust insurance. That's why. Consumers often lack financial literacy. This is also an associated problem. So they need simplified systems and guidance. Otherwise, insurance will not be used by many. Uptake will remain limited. So I'm looking at a way in which I can increase uptake. I can increase people taking taking on insurance of some kind, right? So let's look at one. Simplification of insurance products and processes is necessary. Simplification of products and processes is necessary. Unless policies is necessary help is acceptable. This phrase is acceptable only because unless is used. Otherwise, is necessary would be unacceptable, but this is acceptable. To strengthening these can improve trust. So strengthening can improve trust, where this is valid. System strengthened, guidance provided, and then uptake will improve. So strengthening can improve trust. So 2 would be valid. 3, financial literacy and consumer guidance are important for informed choice. These are directly discussed. Literacy is discussed, guidance is discussed. D is the right answer. All of these 3 are valid assumptions. Okay. Let's valid solutions implied. We weren't talking about assumptions, we are talking about solutions implied. Let's look at question 31. Question 31 is looking at assumptions. The passage is about the effectiveness of central bank's inflation targeting mandate is increasingly bound by the fiscal monetary nexus. So effectiveness of central bank is limited. Increasingly bound would mean limited by fiscal monetary nexus. So there is something called fiscal monetary nexus, which is described here, which leads to fiscal dominance, where essentially the political will affect whether a central bank is effective or not. Otherwise, they'll not be fiscally responsible and they'll continue spending in an irresponsible way. We are told here without a credible commitment to long-term fiscal solvency. So without a commitment from the government to being fiscally solvent, even the most aggressive monetary tightening by an independent central bank risks becoming a driver of future inflation. So if the government does not commit a long-term fiscal solvency commitment, if the government does not make this commitment, without this, the monetary policy will lead to inflation. Okay, so let's look at the options. We are looking for valid underlying assumptions. One says a central bank's institutional independence is insufficient to guarantee price stability in the absence of government fiscal discipline. So this is a strong statement. Central bank's institutional independence is insufficient. And this is valid because of this line I've marked here. Without commitment, none of this is actually becoming possible. It will lead to inflation if there is no commitment. So 1 is valid. It is insufficient to guarantee price stability. There will be inflation if the government doesn't commit. 2, high interest rate regimes are inherently counterproductive for all developing economies. So 2 is invalid, and we can go with option C here. By the way, like I told you in the previous paper also, when we discussed that we are going to have questions with multiple statements more and more now based on the past 2-3 years. Some questions will have 4 statements, some will have 5 statements. Use the key to your advantage. You didn't need to check statement 3 here. If you had solved these carefully enough, you could have gone with option C, and this helps more with questions which have more statements. Public perception regarding ability to pay directly influences current effectiveness of monetary policy. So I'm looking for a phrase which will help me justify directly increases. In such cases, public loses faith in the currency, right? So directly influences. C is the correct answer for question number 31. Okay, let's take a look at question 32. We are asked to check which of these are implicit. Implicit is just implied by the passage, suggested by the passage. Rapid development of advanced technologies increasingly shape relations among major powers, and this is now a strategic necessity. So because of this, countries are seeking to reduce technological dependence on rivals. because they were trying to develop advanced technologies for advantage. They're reducing dependence on rivals and aim to enhance strategic autonomy. They want to enhance strategic autonomy, but with this there is also risk of fragmentation. People will get fragmented, innovation networks will get fragmented. So aim to enhance strategic autonomy can have a negative impact on innovation. Okay, this is the passage, fairly straightforward. Which option do we go with as valid implicit one? Let's look at 1. Technological interdependence among nations has historically contributed to faster and more efficient innovation. So option 1 is fairly complicated for us to accept. I would expect option 1 to cause problems to most students. Most of us will think it's incorrect. Okay, so let's look at 1. Technological interdependence has historically contributed to faster and more efficient innovation. Okay, we'll not find evidence for historically contributed to faster and more efficient innovation. Okay, now let's place question 32 aside and we'll get back to why this is the way it is. Let's look at question 2. Strategic autonomy in critical technologies needs complete technological self-sufficiency. Needs complete technological self-sufficiency. 2 is definitely invalid. So 2 is invalid. 1 is also invalid. So you would end up going with 3 only. Control over advanced technologies is now considered an important component of national power. Okay. So you think 3 is valid. We should never mark, the reason why I said circle question 32, never immediately mark it off. Check statement 4. Technology driven alliances can entirely, the reason why I'm especially not marking 3 immediately as right is, I'm not entirely sure about 1, although this is not mentioned. I can tell that technological interdependence has contributed to innovation. This has contributed to innovation is correct here based on this line. Okay, this part is correct based on this line. This second half jo hai iska, historically contributed faster and efficient innovation, that is a little problematic. So I have put 1 aside and I know 2 is incorrect for sure. Now a wrong decision we can take can push us to go with D, but I know 1 needs checking. This part needs specific checking. 3 says is now considered important component is valid because now countries are increasingly deciding. 3 is valid. 4 says technology driven alliances can entirely eliminate geopolitical competition. So 4 would be invalid. Now I'm left with 3. 3 is definitely valid. What about 1? Technological interdependence among nations has historically contributed to faster and more efficient innovation. So from the passage I can say this for sure. Technological interdependence among nations has led to better innovation. Don't read the second half here. Technological interdependence among nations has led to better innovation than when there is fragmentation. Matlab, with option 1, what I'm trying to do by cancelling this and rewriting it as something else is I'm trying to tell you why 1 is or can be valid. 1 can be valid because I can replace these words with technological interdependence among nations has led to better innovation than when there was fragmentation. Jab fragment hua, तो there will not be global innovation network. So technological innovation or progress of innovation will not be as fast. So I can infer that in the absence of this, in the absence of interdependence, it will be slower, therefore has historically contributed to faster and more efficient innovation. Valid. A is the correct choice. Okay. So I wanted to tell you to specifically learn to take a relook at options. 32 A is the right answer. For passage 2, question 33, what is the assumption underlying the argument? The passage is the same. Can we find an underlying assumption? A, global cooperation will inevitably, in technology, will inevitably collapse. This is invalid. Cooperation will inevitably collapse. innovation in progress only in fully open and unregulated global markets can progress. So invalid. Strategic autonomy and global cooperation are mutually exclusive. They're not mutually exclusive, they're inclusive. B is the right answer. Technological leadership increasingly determines a country's position in the international order. This is a valid choice. If we said it does not determine, then this increasingly shaping relations, strategic necessity, all of this will become incorrect. So B is the correct answer for question 33. यहाँ कोर क्वेश्चन 41 में आपको कोर मैसेज पूछा गया है. व्हाट इज द कोर मैसेज ऑफ द ऑथर? कोर मैसेज मतलब ये दिस इज अनदर वे टू आस्क यू मेन पॉइंट और क्रक्स ऑफ द ऑथर. ठीक है. सो मेन पॉइंट हियर इज अर्लियर relationships often emerge from limited circles, but today because of dating platforms and social media, relationships emerge from many places. And because of this, people may evaluate relationships like products. They'll think that relationships are products. The paradox is, or the illusion is, there is greater initial choice, but this may lead to frequent switching, emotional fatigue and shallow bonds. So the author is trying to say is because of social media and dating platforms, people have this illusion of choice, but it leads to these kind of bad outcomes: frequent switching, emotional fatigue, shallow bonds. Okay. So let's look at A. We are trying to essentially find out what is the main point of the passage, which is best expressed by one of these options. Option A says digital dating platforms fundamentally undermine long-term relationships by replacing traditional social norms with superficial choice. So a few things wrong with option A. One is it's focused only on digital dating platforms. Passage is talking about digital dating platforms and social media. Both have that impact. Fundamentally undermine long-term relationships. This is valid, no problem with this. By replacing traditional social norms and with superficial choice. The dating platforms themselves are not replacing norms. Society is slowly, the norms in society are changing. So there are two problems with option A. One is it focuses only on digital dating platforms, which could be problematic because there are two things mentioned here. And the other is it suggests that the platform changes norms, which is not exactly accurate. We'll put A aside. Best expresses means we, in many questions, expect this to happen in at least 50% of the questions in the exam. Two options will seem likely at least, and then you need to evaluate and eliminate your way to the right choice. D says changes in modern lifestyles and time constraints are the primary reason for declining relationship. This is not the primary reason. Primary reason is dating apps and social media. C, wider dating pool reduces dissatisfaction. It increases dissatisfaction here, right? So reduces dissatisfaction would be incorrect. B says more relationship options can weaken commitment by encouraging constant comparison and optimization. Option B has no problem at all. It clearly tells us that if there are more options, whether they're provided by dating platforms or social media, it can weaken commitment by encouraging constant comparison and optimization. So option B is the correct choice. If you're trying to compare A and B, I can understand some problem with this, but option A focuses only on digital. And the problem with saying only this is, notice, by the way, just carefully notice why option A is incorrect. I want you to have discussed this in class many times before. This applies only to main point questions and summary questions. ठीक है. अब मेन पॉइंट में ऑथर ने कहीं पे तो पैसेज में मेन पॉइंट दे रखा होगा. सपोज दीज टू लाइन्स, लाइन 1 एंड लाइन 2, ये दोनों लाइंस में ऑथर ने मेन पॉइंट दे रखा है. देन आई वांट टू, फॉर दिस क्वेश्चन, मेन पॉइंट क्वेश्चन, आई वांट टू थिंक ऑफ, मुझको ये सोचना है कि सपोज करो ऑप्शन ई इज द करेक्ट चॉइस. दैट मीन्स ऑप्शन ई कैन रिप्लेस द मेन पॉइंट ऑफ द ऑथर. रिप्लेस का मतलब ये हुआ पैसेज के एब्सेंस में भी, पैसेज अगर नहीं होता रीडर के पास, अगर ऑप्शन ई कोई फ्रेश रीडर पढ़ेगा, इफ सम फ्रेश रीडर रीड्स ऑप्शन ई, that person should still be able to determine what was the main point of the author. That's the logic behind how the question is created. The summary question is the same in the sense that if the summary question is option E is right, I'm not trying to just replace the main point. in theory I'm trying to replace the full passage. If a new person were to read option E in the case of a summary question, they should be able to get the complete gist of the passage, the entirety of the passage. That brings me to option A. Option A is problematic because in the absence of the passage, if I read option A, I think this is the only thing that plays this role, and it actually changes social norms. If you notice that in the passage, so in the based on the passage, I can't say these words. Digital dating platforms replace traditional social norms. If you read these words, those of you who think A is right, if you just read these words, digital dating platforms replace traditional norms. That's not what they outright do. That happens because they are in the market. Okay. So A has these two problems. One is it speaks only of this, and then it states that it changes social norms. B has no such problems. B states exactly what the core message is. Okay, let's take a look at question 42, which we are looking for inferences, and there are multiple statements, so we can hopefully reach the answer faster than just going through each very carefully. Urban transport reforms increasingly rely on data-driven planning tools. So transport reforms require data-driven planning tools. These systems often prioritize efficiency at the aggregate level, and they don't look at localized disruptions faced by peripheral neighborhoods. So now we are commenting on the data-driven planning systems which prioritize just one part and they ignore the peripheries. Technological optimization as inherently objective. If you think of technological optimization as an inherently good thing, policymakers, you will underestimate how such systems can actually lead to social inequality. So your big data-driven system may actually lead to some peripheral neighborhoods or people not being served in the same way. It could lead to social inequality. Okay. One says aggregate efficiency metrics can obscure unequal transport outcomes across different urban areas. Aggregate efficiency metrics. I'm looking for inferences, so I'm making fresh conclusions from the passage. This should be based on some data in the passage. So, aggregate level metrics can obscure unequal transport outcomes, social inequalities across different urban areas. So one is definitely valid. It can obscure or hide inequality. One is valid. Two, algorithmic transport planning always leads to reduced service quality. Now, if you search for this in peripheral regions, if you search for this, you're not going to find two. So if you invest your time in figuring out two, you'll know that C and D are definitely invalid, and you don't really need to check 3, but you only need to check 4, which is that technology may unintentionally reshape patterns of social and spatial inequality, which is the last line. So B is the right answer. We could have not checked 3 if we solved it in an efficient way. For some people, this process may be complicated. Please solve it in the regular way. Centralized mobility platforms can magnify the impact of technical failures. If you have some centralized platform, technologically optimized platform, it may, I'm looking for the exact phrase. Single technical disruption can paralyze mobility across the city. So, centralized mobility platforms can magnify the impact of failures. B is the right answer. 1, 3 and 4. Okay. Question 43. So question 43, I'm just trying to identify which of them are correct, essentially a factual question. Is the same passage which is talking about urban transport reforms. Let's look at each statement. Transport planning increasingly relies on data, this from data-driven optimization tools. This is valid from here. So 1 is definitely valid, C would be invalid. Let's look at 2. Aggregate efficiency metrics reflect localized service disruptions accurately. Reflect accurately would be invalid. So 2 is definitely invalid. So that leaves me with just checking option 4 whether it's valid or not. 4 says centralized platforms can cause citywide transport paralysis. 4 is valid, which leaves us with option 1 A. Leaves us with option A. 3 is also valid. Peripheral neighborhoods often have lower data visibility. We are told disruptions faced by peripheral neighborhoods because the data overlooks it. 5 says technological optimization is always socially neutral. Always socially neutral is completely against the passage. And 6 says these infrastructure embedded reforms are difficult to reverse later. We are told that they are difficult to correct in the passage. We are told they are difficult to correct later. So A is the correct answer, right? Let's see the next one. Passage 1, question 51. We are looking for inferences from the passage. We are told that if there is inequality in the pattern of population growth, there is greater inequality in food production and utilization. So population के growth में के pattern में inequality होगा तो greater inequality in food production and use. As societies become wealthier, the consumption of animal products increases. This line is simpler than the first line to understand what is taking place. Conversion of plant-based food into animal-based food for human consumption is highly inefficient. So this is highly inefficient. So wealthier, as societies become wealthier, this conversion of plant-based food into animal-based food is a highly inefficient process that a wealthy society adopts. We are trying to make valid inferences from this. There are other parts of the passage also where inferences can be made from. So we'll see which of these are valid. 1 says increasing consumption of animal products in wealthier societies, which is, I've marked it already, causes reduction in the amount of food available for direct human consumption. So we are told that this will this is inefficient, right? So this would lead to shortage of direct human consumption food. It's an inefficient process. So 1 would be valid. There are other words also apart from inefficient, but 1 is valid. 2 says poultry based diets are an efficient means of converting plant into. We have not discussed poultry based diets, by the way. Okay, we have discussed chickens and whether they're consumed or not, but we have not discussed a poultry based diet in the passage. So 2 is invalid. So we just need to check statement 3. Inequality in population growth patterns directly causes low calorie recovery rates in animal based foods. We can't say directly causes low recovery rates in animal based foods. Inequality in population growth leads to inequality in food. This inequality in inequality in population growth leads to some societies becoming wealthier, which will lead to this kind of imbalance. So I can't say inequality directly causes. At best, I can say indirectly could lead to. It could indirectly lead to would be valid. Directly causes would be invalid. Right? So this would be invalid. So 2 and 3 are invalid. We can go with option A. Statement 4 also says due to inefficient calorie conversion, which is discussed here in the second half of the passage, this part. Caused by dietary choices, rising affluence can aggravate inequality. This leads to further inequality in food utilization, which is valid from this part. So this causes utilization problems, which is valid. A is the right inference we can make. Passage 52, passage 2, question 52. I'm looking at assumptions and we are discussing how India's crude oil sector is a critical component of its energy security. It requires long-term investment in upstream exploration. Transformational progress also depends on strategic leadership. So if you want to change this crude oil sector, you want to transform it, you'll need strategic leadership, and you'll want changes in both tangible outputs, which is more refineries, more pipelines, and also intangible outputs such as technological capability, stakeholder, are people trusting you to do this, is there coordination between your teams? So intangible outputs also. These are essential indicators of systemic improvement. So if you actually want to make crude oil sector important, or if you want to improve it, you need tangible and intangible outputs that strategic leadership actually chooses, and the strategic leadership must be able to balance these outputs. Okay, so let's take a look at the valid assumptions. One says short-term projects alone cannot secure long-term energy and industrial outcomes. We need to figure out where the author is referring to anything long-term. There's an exact word which refers to long-term investment in upstream exploration. So short-term projects alone cannot secure long-term energy and industrial outcomes. You'll need long-term projects as well. One is valid. That eliminates option B. 2, leadership and institutional strategy shape systemic outcomes beyond single projects. So leadership is needed to drive modernization and etc. So leadership and institutional strategy shape systemic outcomes beyond single projects. This would be valid. 2 is valid. So that would eliminate option D. 3 says technological and organizational improvements are necessary for sectoral transformations. So are essential, technological and organizational improvements are essential indicators, are necessary, is valid. 4, infrastructure alone is insufficient. So you don't just need infrastructure, you need intangible outputs also, like these. So infrastructure alone is insufficient, you need intangible outputs also. The right answer is option C. Option C is the right answer. Why is statement 5 invalid? Because expanding refinery capacity automatically ensures, would be incorrect. Nothing in the passage automatically ensures. C is the correct answer for question number 52. Same passage, different question. So earlier UPSC used to ask some long passages, maybe 1 or 2 long passages where there are 3 questions, 4 questions. Nowadays we have seen that long passages are few. Sometimes you'll get a 3 question or a 4 question one. What you're getting are many more passages which are slightly long, but you get 2 questions from it. 1 passage and 2 questions. We have seen this in last year's paper and to a degree in the paper before that. So here we are asked to summarize. Best summarizes the passage. Summary would be, I'm trying to replace the entire passage, which includes the main point, its options, its opinions, its facts. I want to find something that can grab all of that and replace it. So India's crude oil, we have already read what the passage is about. Let's look at A. India's crude oil development relies on long-term investments and leadership. This would be quite close. It has a lot of things missing, like we need tangible, intangible outputs, etc. We'll put A aside. You'll notice B has a problem, depends mainly on physical infrastructure. This is incorrect. C has a problem, can be achieved through pipeline expansion. This is not discussed. And D, technological upgrades, not discussed as the summary. Technological upgrades determine competitiveness and systematic transformation in oil. So technological upgrades determine competitiveness, can be considered right, by the way. This, that it determines competitiveness, can be considered right. They are essential indicators of systematic improvement. The real problem is it's not the summary of the passage. Option A tells me that crude oil requires long-term investments and leadership, which is covering at least 2 aspects of the passage. It does not cover this part. but A is the best possible choice, right? Option A is the best possible choice. Okay, so let's look at the next question, which is passage 1, question 61. We are told to look at practical suggestions, and I already told you what we are supposed to do for practical suggestions. We have to use the passage and then act as the state with a capital S, which we are supposed to take actions on behalf of the state, which are positive and well-meaning essentially. What actions can we take? So let's take a look at what the passage had to say. What is the problem that I can practically solve or improve? So a low-cost solar desalination device has been invented by someone, or they have come up with this. It produces clean drinking water from brackish or contaminated sources. This can be deployed in water-stressed areas. This innovation can be deployed here. And it's a sustainable solution to local water scarcity. So we know what use this can have, what applications this can have. By the way, this type of passages were recently, this is not a previous year passage, of course. This were practical solutions, practical implication questions started being asked from 2020, like I told you in the first question. This is a passage type which was like last year. We had an exact passage like this last year, which spoke about how they're using carbon dioxide to produce limestone. The reason why I'm referring to a previous year passage is, expect something like this, which is some logical device has been invented. If you're the state, what practical action can you take? If you represent the state, you can't take households can install desalination units to sell water commercially. This is an illogical action, and it's not really practical for the state, because we are talking about water stressed rural areas and local water scarcity ke liye this is applicable, not for households. Citizens can use the device to completely eliminate municipal water supply. Again, same as option A. This is not for households. This is for places which have brackish or contaminated sources. C says researchers should expand technology for industrial use. Again, invalid. B is the right answer. Setting up solar desalination systems can provide clean drinking water in water stressed regions. This applies to local water scarcity, water stressed rural areas. B is the correct answer. So keep this question type in mind. This is a relatively fresh innovation by UPSC. Let's look at passage 2 and question 62. Passage 2 is talking about how India is the second largest producer of fish and contributes significantly to fisheries. Fisheries contribute significantly to India. Small scale fishermen dominate the sector. The sector is threatened with sustainability issues. What can help is modernization can help. Additionally, promoting responsible fishing practices can help. So these things can help improve fisheries. Fisheries are crucial to India. That's what seems to be the passage about. We're looking at practical implications. Again, we know how to answer these. If I'm the state, modernizing fishing fleets can increase efficiency and reduce losses. This is an action that I can take as the state. This can help. One is valid. Strengthening market access and exports can enhance fisher incomes sustainably. I can't tell from the passage how market access and exports can enhance these sustainably, how incomes will be increased sustainably. We have discussed export earnings in the passage, and we have discussed market access also. Inefficient supply chains we have discussed. So market access is in some way referred to. Income stability is different from sustainable income rise. So this here, it threatens income stability. So income stability is threatened, but I don't know what leads to a sustained rise in income. This would be sustainable rise in income. I don't know what leads to a sustained rise in income. So 2 is invalid. 3, digital marketplaces can improve supply chains. Digital marketplaces are given in the passage as can improve efficiency. 4, community-based resource management is necessary for long-term sustainability. You need community-based resource management. Valid. 5 says regulating fishing intensity is essential to maintain healthy marine ecosystems. So let's take a look at option 5, regulating fishing intensity. We are told responsible fishing practices is essential to maintain healthy marine ecosystems. So let me tell you the exact words which make 5 invalid. I told you 2 is already incorrect. By the way, if 2 is incorrect, 5 gets eliminated in 2 cases, and we still have option D. Option D can have 3 missing, so it's problematic, but generally we should be able to evaluate 5 as a standalone statement also. So I'm trying to find what is essential to maintain healthy marine ecosystems. Nothing mentioned here, nothing mentioned here, nothing. Additionally, promoting responsible fishing practices. Overfishing is mentioned here, but overfishing threatens income stability. But I can't say regulating fishing intensity is essential to maintain healthy marine ecosystems. So the right answer here would be option A. Alright, let's see the next one. Same passage, another question. Here we are asked to capture the crux, the main point of the author. And option D says this depends primarily on industrial expansion. The main point of the author should be fish, and fishing is important. For solving this problem, you should modernize and you should promote responsible fishing. So these should be mentioned accurately. Fisheries development depends primarily on industrial expansion, invalid. Technological adoption alone ensures ecological sustainability. And 1, 2 and 3 drive fishers' incomes. If you notice, these can drive fishers' incomes is valid. It's not the valid main point or crux of the author. The crux of the author should mention how we improve this. What can we do? India's fisheries require modernization, so we should modernize. The message is included. Community management, they need community management, and they need sustainable practices, right? Okay, so A is the correct answer. Let's take a look at question 71. We are solving assumptions. So we are told that based on ARC, there's need for long-term systemic reforms to improve governance, accountability, and citizen-centric service delivery. Implementation also requires, so what kind of reforms are needed and what improvement is needed is told to us. Implementation requires strong leadership to drive change. Leadership is required of certain type. And we should prioritize both types of outcomes. So there are 2 tangible outcomes and intangible outcomes. We see this phrase again here, tangible, intangible, but the outcomes are different. We need to focus on both of these outcomes to prioritize this. So let's take a look at valid assumptions we could make. Comprehensive governance reforms cannot be achieved through piecemeal short-term measures. So we need long-term systemic reforms. We can't do this, cannot be achieved through short-term measures. 1 is valid. So this would eliminate B. 2, leadership and institutional design influence system-wide administrative outcomes beyond individual policy changes. So leadership and institutional design, effective implementation and leadership, these influence system-wide administrative outcomes beyond individual policy changes. So okay, let's put 2 aside. 2 is by the way present in every option, but generally let's put 2 aside for me to explain. 3, shifts in bureaucratic behavior are necessary. So we are told that reforms are expected to produce this. The reforms should include intangible outcomes such as improved administrative culture. So shifts in bureaucracy are necessary is valid. Tangible outcomes alone are insufficient, so we need intangible outcomes also. So 3 and 4 are valid. If 3 and 4 are valid, we can go with option C here. Option 5 says guarantees quality implementation of ARC2 reforms. Wide stakeholder participation does not guarantee quality implementation. So 5 is definitely invalid. 5 is definitely invalid helps. The reason for 2 beyond individual policy changes is because reforms are expected to produce tangible things like policy changes and intangible things So I can say therefore outcomes beyond individual policy changes, other things are also intangible outcomes will also improve. So for this reason I can say statement 2 is valid, C is the correct answer. Okay, let's take a look at passage 2. Passage 2 is talking about the most logical and practical message, which is main point of the author or crux of the author, like we have seen so far. I told you there are many ways to ask this. We are told water pollution often focuses on household sewage and waste. Industrial discharge receives less attention despite being major contributor. When rules exist, weak monitoring and poor enforcement allow many units. So we should enforce industrial waste management rules better. That should be the message. A says reducing industrial discharge requires modernization, not stated. Water pollution persists despite both regulation and industrial practices improving. Water pollution persists is valid. Regulations are there is valid. Industrial practices improving, not discussed. D is invalid. C, household and industrial wastewater both contribute significantly. This is incorrect. Option C is incorrect because we are told clearly this is not a problem about, the problem we are discussing is not about households. We are discussing the problem that industries are ignored. So both contribute cannot be the main point. B says strong enforcement of existing rules can limit river contamination. This is valid. Enforce rules correctly for waste management. B is the correct answer for question 72. Let's look at question 73, which is talking about use of pesticides. Another common question type. Spraying of the same chemical increases resistance. They pass on resistant traits. Farmers often respond by increasing dosage. So this cycle can reduce beneficial insect populations, and integrated pest management is required, crop management is required, limited targeted chemical use is required, and this pattern can be broken. This pattern of reducing beneficial insects, this pattern of leading to worse outbreaks or resistance, these patterns can be broken by this last line. This is the solution to break those patterns. We're looking at inferences. Integrated pest management in option D guarantees complete elimination of all pests. D is invalid. C, pesticide resistance occurs regardless of dosage. Regardless of dosage, not stated. We are talking about what happens in often respond by high dosage. B says farmers will inevitably abandon chemical pesticides. This is also incorrect. A is the only correct choice. Repeat spraying can worsen pest management challenges over time. Unmissable. So some of the questions, as you can see today, are really easy ones and you shouldn't have missed them under any situation. Let's look at passage 4 in this set. This is question 74. We are looking at assumptions. Textile producers are often cautious about adopting new manufacturing. Why? Because their benefits are unknown. They are also cautious because investment using new technology is going to cost some money. The other problem is that when they actually use it, maintenance requires more time. They need to train their workers. So textile producers are not using new technology that much. Such practical challenges can slow modernization. So because of that, modernization is slowed in the textile sector. So examine assumptions. 1, textile producers are a little more likely to adopt technology when benefits outweigh the risks. So textile producers ka likelihood to adopt technology will increase. It will be more when benefits outweigh risks. So when the benefits are known, their benefits are more than the associated risks. So 1 is a valid assumption. If I said are not a little more likely, यहाँ पे not लगा देते, तो this idea in the passage, benefit and risk idea, would get invalidated. So 1 is a valid assumption. 2. Automation's effectiveness is often constrained by necessary human involvement. In option 2, if you've done classes with me, we would be more focused on often constrained and also the phrase automation's effectiveness, because this applies to automation in general. If you look at the passage where automation is marketed, we are discussing automation in general as labor saving. Producers often discover that it requires worker training or workflow adjustments. So automation ka limiter, a limiting factor for automation is the humans operating that automated thing. So this is valid. C is the right answer. If I said is not often constrained, this part that it requires worker training, it requires workflow adjustment, this part would be invalid, right? So C is the correct answer for question number 74. Alright, so this brings our discussion to an end. We have 2 more Anubhav tests coming up. What I want you to remember, please watch the previous Anubhav discussion also. In that, I've gone through each question type, how to solve it in detail, just like I've done it today. So if you have not done classes with me, but if you have problems with your fundamentals, I've discussed each question type and how to approach it in the prior Anubhav discussion and in this one as well. Like I said, we have 2 more papers where we'll continue to perfect our technique and our skills. So with this, let me bring this discussion to an end. Thank you everyone. All the best.